afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am relishing the challenge of keeping you all entertained and awake in that critical 3 p.m. mid-afternoon slump period. We do a lot of work in Kenya, actually, as a foundation, and which is great. It's very enjoyable. But invariably, whenever we're at a conference or a workshop there in Nairobi, this is the point of the day where they bring in the musical guest to make everybody sing and dance, just to re-energize things. So if anything I say starts to feel a little bit dry, just thank your lucky stars that I'm not making you dance. But it is nice to be here, nice to be back. This, I think I was just saying to Achilles, is actually the last place that this tool was discussed publicly. So it's kind of coming full circle to come back here now and give you the update on that. Sorry, Kim, the clock hasn't started. Just so I don't take up too much of your time, I know we're running a little bit late. But that was in, I think it was 2019, and I was here with, obviously, the team from the foundation, and Laura Chinchilla, who's the former president of Costa Rica, and Stephen Stedman, who is a professor from Stanford. And they were both part of a commission that Mr. Annan had convened earlier to that to look at the impact of social media on electoral integrity. And they were here having a panel discussion, talking about some of their findings and their recommendations. And one of the things they found, because they were looking sort of primarily at countries, sort of younger democracies, where they didn't really have the sort of same established norms of multi-party democracy, and where some institutions were sort of weaker. And they found that, obviously, in many of those countries, you had sort of the mass weaponization of social media, which isn't really a technical term, but I think you can probably guess what I mean, which is things like, massive coordinated disinformation campaigns, efforts to undermine the integrity of the information sphere, efforts to drive up, levels of polarization. And in looking at those countries, they realized actually there's some common traits there. They shared some factors. And the three that they identified was that if you had a recent history of violence, you seem to be a little bit more vulnerable. If you had really high levels of polarization already within society, either sort of social, political, religious, whatever, and if you had a really partisan media, that would all make you more vulnerable to the weaponization of social media. And they sort of said, well, look, if we can find these three without really even looking for them, you can identify a whole host of other factors. You can build that into sort of an index system, which would allow you to look at countries that had elections coming up and identify those where social media was going to have a real negative impact. So we said, yes, that's a great idea. And we started having some conversations with Varieties of Democracy, the team based in Uppsala University. Some of you are probably familiar with their work. If you're not, they are well worth checking out. They do some amazing data-driven research on demographic trends. Their annual report this year is very impressive, has lots of very interesting statistics. It's also fairly depressing, considering what it says about the state of democracy, but we've talked about that a lot over the last couple of days, so I won't go on for the time being. But it is well worth checking out some of their work. And we had this discussion with them as to whether or not this was possible. Can you have enough factors feeding into this? Can you build the indicators? Do you have access to the data? And they sort of said, yeah, no problem. We can build this. Academically, it's not a challenge. And in the course of those discussions, then we kind of thought, well, as much as social media is having an impact, it's really not the only thing still that's affecting the integrity of elections, right? There are other socio-economic, political factors. So let's see if we can't bring some of those in as well. And if we can build those indicators, then what we can come out with is a tool not just to point at the vulnerability to social media, but actually something that would help you identify which elections are going to be so challenged by various issues that there's a real chance that they're going to turn violent. So that is basically what this tool is. That's what we're building at the moment with them. It is a series of indicators drawn from the Uppsala Conflict Data Program, from the Violence Early Warning System program as well as involved, from the Digital Society Project. We've got heads of data science from USAID and a bunch of other organizations involved as well. And what we hope to do is, looking at, I think we can cover about 170, 180 countries, is actually identify those elections that really stand a risk of going violent. And then to drill down a little bit on that and also say, okay, why is that? Is it because of the impact of social media and digital platforms? Is it for other reasons? And in doing so, what we hope, if all goes well into plan, is that we'll have a very helpful sort of early warning forecasting tool that will allow national actors, whether you're talking about electoral management bodies or other government institutions, civil society, the media, to understand the threats and risks that their elections face, and develop and deploy resources accordingly, and also the international community of electoral support organizations, donors, partners, to also understand where they need to put their efforts, where they need to put their resources. And in doing so, hopefully, this will play some part in addressing those elections really that are kind of going up to the brink and bringing them back from the brink a little bit, you know, just mitigating that chance that there's going to be violence. And that, for us, is kind of comes back to what is at the heart of our Elections and Democracy program, because the foundation is not a sort of technical support organization. We don't really do capacity building. We are not an electoral observation group. We look at the sort of political context in which elections are taking place. And everything stemmed from Mr. Annan's experience in the 2007 Kenyan election, which turned very violent, and he was called in to mediate. And it was at that point that he sort of realized, look, if we don't do more to improve the integrity of our elections to a point where people really understand or feel that they've had a say and an opportunity to exercise their voice and how they're governed and by whom, then people are increasingly going to look for alternatives. And the street is going to replace the ballot box, and elections increasingly are going to become not just sort of one part of a democratic process, but, you know, a main flashpoint for violence. So we're finalizing this now over the course of the rest of this year. It's going to go live either at the end of this year, but maybe more probably early next year. We'll look ahead sort of per the electoral calendar, 2-3 years, and sort of say, these are the countries having elections over this period where you really need to pay attention. And so you should sort of watch that space for it. We are conscious, and this is something that we're talking through a little bit now, and maybe any of you who've been involved in developing indexes or rankings or any sort of forecasting models are aware of the potential for unintended consequences, in that you do want to draw attention to these challenges, risks, weaknesses, but you don't necessarily want to add fuel to the fire. You don't want to signpost any weaknesses that could then be exploited. So we're in our own way sort of talking through, all right, what's the best way to make this and make the information available publicly that it's useful and credible and helps everybody who's involved in electoral support, as opposed to, you know, maybe going the other way, which is possible. I think when you see some of these sort of global state of democracy reports that come out, or these efforts to rank, you know, who's really a democracy, they can cause a lot of backlash. So that's something that we're still sort of working through, but hopefully the tool will be useful, it'll be productive, it'll be, as I said, live early next year, so watch that space for it. I'm going to leave it there because we're sort of running a little bit short in terms of time, but we do have time for some questions if there are any. If not, we can just go Nairobi style and do a dance for a few minutes. No? All right, great. Well, listen, thanks everybody. I am here with the executive director of the foundation, Corinne, for the rest of the day. So if there is anything that does pop into your mind, any questions or comments, don't hesitate to come and talk to us. Thank you.